You know that moment when you walk into the kitchen and there's a stack of dishes in the sink, the dog hasn't been fed, the kids' permission slips are still unsigned, and you realize no one else even noticed? It's not just about the dishes or the laundry or the bills. It's about the invisible, relentless list running in your head. The one you didn't sign up to manage, but somehow you do every single day. That's emotional labor. And here's the hard truth. When it consistently falls on one partner, it's not just exhausting. It erodes trust, connection, and even love. The good news, we can change it. But it starts with seeing it for what it is, naming it, understanding it, and then rebalancing it together. The first step is bringing emotional labor into the light. Research shows that when work is invisible, it becomes undervalued. And I don't just mean the obvious things like doing the laundry or taking out the trash. I'm talking about the invisible mental checklist that never shuts off. The quiet, constant hum in the background of your mind that says, don't forget to pack the lunches. We're almost out of toothpaste. We need to call your mother back. And, oh, that teacher's conference is next Tuesday. The problem is if the person carrying that mental load doesn't name it and the other person doesn't see it, it becomes the air we breathe. So normal, so constant that no one even realizes it's there. Until, of course, one day you're standing in the kitchen thinking, I can't be the only one who notices all of this, and yet you feel like you are. What makes emotional labor tricky is that it's rarely dramatic. It's not a grand gesture or a big event you can point to. It's the accumulation of tiny, everyday decisions, reminders, and anticipations that make a household or relationship run smoothly. It's the things that when done well, nobody notices, but when forgotten, everybody feels. And because no one's clapping for the mental spreadsheet in your head, it's easy for it to go completely unacknowledged. I once read a study where couples were asked to list all the tasks they believed they were responsible for in the home. What was fascinating wasn't just the difference in lists. It was that the partner not carrying the emotional labor literally didn't list half of the responsibilities the other person was tracking. Not because they were being dishonest, not because they didn't care, but because those tasks were invisible to them. They'd never had to notice them. And here's the kicker. You can't share a load you can't see. So naming emotional labor isn't about making a PowerPoint presentation of your grievances. It's about creating a shared language for something that until now has been silent. It's about saying, hey, there's a whole category of work happening here, and it matters. When we name it, we give it value. When we give it value, we create the possibility of fairness. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Naming emotional labor means being willing to pull back the curtain. That's vulnerable. It's opening yourself up to being misunderstood or dismissed. It's taking the risk that the other person might say, I had no idea. And that's actually the best case scenario, because awareness is the first step toward change. But here's the part we can't skip. When you bring it up, it has to be framed as a shared problem, not a personal attack. If I go in guns blazing with, you never do anything around here, what I'm really doing is shutting the door before the conversation even starts. But if I say, I've realized I'm carrying a lot of mental responsibilities that you might not even know about, and it's becoming too heavy for me, I'd like us to figure out how we can share it. I'm inviting them into the reality with me instead of shoving them into the defensive corner. When emotional labor stays invisible, it's easy for one partner to quietly drown under it while the other doesn't even know they're in deep water together. But when we name it, really name it, we start building the bridge from silence to shared responsibility. And that's the only bridge that leads to balance. Emotional labor is not just about time, it's about energy. And I don't mean the kind of energy you can measure with a Fitbit or track by your step count. I'm talking about mental and emotional energy, the kind that gets drained not by what you do, but by what you have to constantly hold in your mind. Studies on cognitive load show that when our brains are juggling multiple tasks, tracking details, and anticipating needs all at once, we enter a near constant state of low-level alertness. That's the same biological state our nervous system uses for managing threats. It's not life or death, but it is exhausting in a way that builds up quietly over time. Think about it like this. Carrying emotional labor is like having 20 browser tabs open in your brain at all times. A couple of tabs are fine, but when the list of things to remember, plan, and anticipate never stops growing, it starts to eat away at your focus. You're not just making dinner, you're mentally adding eggs to the grocery list, remembering to RSVP for the weekend party, and wondering if you sent that email to the teacher. Your body is at the stove, but your brain is everywhere else. Here's the thing, when one person is consistently in that state, they're not just more tired. They're more likely to experience burnout, resentment, and even health problems. We know from stress research that constant cognitive load raises cortisol levels, and chronically high cortisol is linked to anxiety, depression, and physical exhaustion. And in a relationship, that level of depletion doesn't stay in one lane. It starts showing up everywhere. Patience runs thin, small irritations feel huge, and the desire to connect starts shrinking. What's even trickier is that this kind of exhaustion often doesn't get taken seriously because it's not visible. If someone is physically worn out from working a 12-hour shift, people notice. They get sympathy, maybe even help. But if someone's exhaustion comes from quietly carrying the emotional logistics for a household or a partnership, it can be dismissed as just stress or overthinking. And when the exhaustion is minimized, it becomes even harder to talk about. I've seen this play out in couples where one partner says, "I'm so tired, I just can't think about anything else right now," and the other genuinely can't understand why. They see the same hours in the day, but not the same mental demands. This gap in understanding can be devastating, not because either partner is bad or selfish, but because the toll of emotional labor is invisible unless you've carried it yourself. That's why talking about the emotional toll is so important. It's not about keeping score. It's about saying, this is costing me more than you realize. When one person's mental bandwidth is constantly stretched, they lose the ability to rest, not just physically, but mentally. And rest is where we recover our capacity to love, to listen, to laugh. Without it, even small acts of connection start to feel like another task to manage. And here's the truth we have to sit with. No relationship can thrive when one person is always running on fumes. If we want connection, intimacy, and trust to grow, then we have to acknowledge that emotional labor isn't just about who does what. It's about how much mental energy each person has left to show up for the relationship. Without that acknowledgement, the imbalance only widens. With it, we have the chance to rebalance not just the workload, but the energy we both bring to each other. One of the most damaging beliefs is that one partner, usually the woman, just naturally notices more or cares more. That's not biology, that's social conditioning. From the time we're little, many of us are taught, directly or indirectly, to be the ones who notice, remember, and tend to other people's needs before our own. It's praised as kindness, empathy, or being good. And in some ways, those traits are beautiful, but somewhere along the way, that goodness quietly morphs into expectation. Noticing becomes our job. Caring becomes our default. And when that belief goes unchallenged, it's easy for it to settle into the foundation of a relationship without either partner even realizing it's there. The truth is, most people don't stop to ask where these patterns came from. We assume it's just personality, or that one person's more detail-oriented or better at nurturing, but research on gender roles and socialization tells a different story. Girls are often encouraged from an early age to anticipate needs, whether that's passing the salt before someone asks for it, smoothing over awkward moments at the dinner table, or taking responsibility for the feelings in the room. Boys, on the other hand, are often given more permission to focus on their own tasks and experiences without that constant scanning of others' needs. Fast forward 20 or 30 years, and those habits show up in our partnerships not because of ability, but because of conditioning. And here's the thing, when we believe that one person just cares more, it lets everyone else off the hook. It frames the imbalance as natural instead of learned, which means it doesn't seem like something that can or should be changed. That's a dangerous story because it not only burdens one partner with more labor, it also robs the other of the chance to grow in emotional awareness and relational responsibility. I've seen couples get stuck in this dynamic for years, where one person is quietly drowning under the weight of managing not just their own emotions, but the needs and feelings of everyone else. And because they're better at it, it becomes their permanent role. The problem is, being good at something doesn't mean you should be doing all of it. Imagine telling someone, "You're so good at listening, you should be the one who listens to everyone's problems for the rest of your life." That's not a compliment. That's a sentence. Challenging the natural caregiver myth takes courage from both partners. For the one carrying the labor, it means being willing to let go of the idea that their worth is tied to always being the one who notices. It means allowing someone else to step in, even if they don't do it exactly the way you would. For the other partner, it means intentionally learning to see what you've been trained not to notice, and then acting on it without being asked. When we start questioning the stories we've inherited, we realize that emotional labor doesn't have to be tethered to gender, personality, or tradition. It can be shared, adjusted, and redefined. And when it is, something powerful happens. Both people get to participate fully in caring for the relationship. One person no longer carries the emotional weather report for the household, and the other learns how to be an active, engaged partner in the climate they create together. That's the kind of shift that doesn't just rebalance the work, it rebuilds the foundation of trust and connection between you. Data changes conversations. Instead of arguing about who does more, track the tasks, both seen and unseen, for a week. Write them down. It sounds so simple, almost too simple, but you would be amazed at how transformative this can be. When things are vague, they're negotiable in ways that often lead to frustration, but when you make the work visible, when you can literally see it on paper, it's no longer about perception or opinion, it's about reality. One of the biggest challenges with emotional labor is that so much of it exists in the shadows. Planning the meals, remembering that the dog's vaccine is due, keeping track of school events, managing family traditions, none of it shows up on a to-do list pinned to the fridge. And because it's invisible, it's incredibly easy for it to be forgotten or underestimated. This is why arguments about fairness in relationships often feel circular. One partner feels overburdened, the other feels accused, and both walk away without any real change. But the moment you map out the tasks, the conversation shifts. You stop debating feelings and start working with facts. I've seen couples who thought they had a fairly even split of responsibilities, completely stunned by what the tracking revealed. One partner might realize, "Oh, I didn't even think of bedtime routines as labor," or "I didn't realize how many small decisions go into planning our vacation." That's the power of visibility. It shines a light on what's been hiding in plain sight. And here's the thing. This isn't about keeping score. It's not about creating a weaponized list you can throw in someone's face. The point of tracking is to build awareness and understanding, not resentment. When you both see the full picture, you can talk about it without the defensiveness that comes from not knowing. It becomes less about blame and more about, "Wow, I didn't see that before. How can we rebalance this together?" Sometimes people resist this exercise because they're afraid of what it might uncover. Maybe they worry it'll confirm an imbalance they'd rather not acknowledge. Or maybe they fear it'll force them to step up in ways that feel uncomfortable. But if we want equity, we can't be afraid of clarity. Naming the truth doesn't create the problem. It simply gives us the language and the evidence to solve it. There's also a deeper psychological benefit here. When emotional labor is tracked and shared openly, the person carrying most of the load finally feels validated. It's no longer a private frustration. They can see, and their partner can see, the reality of their contribution. And when that happens, something powerful shifts. Resentment starts to soften because acknowledgement has entered the room. When you make the invisible visible, you give your relationship a fighting chance at real balance. Without that step, you're building your sense of fairness on assumptions and guesswork. With it, you're building on truth, and truth is the only foundation strong enough to hold the weight of a shared life. There's a big difference between helping out and taking ownership. Helping out implies that the work is someone else's and you're just stepping in when they ask or when it's convenient. Taking ownership means you see the work, you claim responsibility for it, and you follow through without being prompted. It's not about doing a favor, it's about being an equal partner in making the life you share actually work. This is one of the most common sticking points I see in relationships where emotional labor is uneven. The partner carrying more of the load often says, "I don't just want help. I want you to see what needs to be done and do it without me having to ask." And that's such an important distinction, because when the default system is, "I'll do it unless I ask you," it still keeps all the noticing, planning, and tracking on one person's plate. The other partner is still just a responder, not a co-owner. Think about a workplace for a second. If you have a team project and one person does all the planning, delegates all the tasks, and follows up on deadlines while the rest of the team just waits to be told what to do, is that a fair workload? No. And it's not just about fairness, it's about the emotional toll it takes to be the one holding all the responsibility. In relationships, this project manager role is often invisible, but it's one of the heaviest forms of emotional labor. Taking ownership means actively scanning for needs the way you would if you were solely responsible. It's noticing that the laundry is piling up, realizing that someone needs to sign the permission slip, or remembering to order the birthday gift. Not because you were told, but because you share responsibility for the outcome. It means you don't see it as my partner's job to keep the household or relationship running smoothly. You see it as our job. Here's what makes this shift challenging. It requires changing long-standing habits and sometimes long-standing beliefs. If one partner has always been the default manager of emotional labor, the other may have been unintentionally trained to wait for instructions. And change means both people have to step into new territory. The person used to carrying it all has to let go of some control and resist the temptation to micromanage. The person stepping up has to learn to anticipate, plan, and follow through without being reminded. But the payoff is huge. When both partners take ownership, the dynamic in the relationship changes completely. The person who was overburdened starts to feel lighter, not just because the tasks are shared, but because they're no longer the only one keeping the whole system afloat. And the person stepping up begins to feel more invested and connected because they're not just a helper, they are a builder. Relationships thrive when responsibility is shared at a deep, almost instinctive level. When we stop thinking in terms of help and start thinking in terms of ownership, we create a partnership where both people carry the weight together. And when the weight is shared, it stops feeling like a burden. It starts feeling like the foundation for the life you're building side by side. When emotional labor falls on one partner, it's not just about who's doing the chores or who's sending the reminders. It's about the health of the relationship. It's about trust, respect, and the belief that both people are in it together. Rebalancing that load isn't a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing commitment to noticing, naming, and acting with intention. When we name the invisible work, acknowledge the toll it takes, challenge the myths that keep it in place, make it visible, and move from helping to owning, we're not just dividing tasks. We're building a partnership rooted in equity, empathy, and connection. And that kind of partnership doesn't just survive the daily grind. It thrives because both people know they're valued and supported. This is the work of love, and it's not always easy, but it's worth it every time in every relationship. Good luck, and may you both carry the load and the love together.